What is up, guys? Welcome to another episode of the Meaning of Podcast. I am Ace.
This is RB3.
And this is the podcast where we talk about your favorite directors and the deeper meanings of their films. And this episode and this next two episodes, we're going to be talking about Paul Thomas Anderson. It's finally here. He was recently nominated for an Oscar for his film Phantom Thread. And we're going to do a two-parter because we feel like we want to kind of talk about him a little bit more than any other director we've talked about besides Nolan, because we did a two-parter for Nolan and we did a two-parter for Spielberg, and we both agreed that someone like a Paul Thomas Anderson deserves a two-parter.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like, honestly, if you take any of his movies, you could do a whole episode of the meaning of just based on each individual film. So, you know, we're going to take apart a lot of his filmography from the very beginning with Hard 8 all the way down to Punch Drunk Love for the first half. And second half, we're doing There Will Be Blood all the way up into his most recent Phantom Thread. So 4 movies apiece. And yeah, I think it's going to be a fun adventure. Paul Thomas Anderson is one of my favorite directors of all time. He's made multiple films that are like ranked high on my all-time favorite list. So this is going to be exciting. Yeah,
exactly, guys. So we're going to be doing 2 parts, like RB3 said, Hard 8 to Punch Drunk Love. And then I think you said There Will Be Blood to Current Times, which is Phantom Thread. We feel like this is a better opportunity for us to kind of get into his films a little bit more relaxed, even though it's still kind of going to go quickly. Like RB3 said, there is a lot to cover when it comes to a PTA, so we won't be taking forever on each movie, unfortunately. We don't want to make a 2-hour episode for each podcast because we feel like that might be unnecessary for our lovely listeners who don't want to sit through us talking about a movie for too long. But anyways, guys, we're going to be getting into that. PTA is obviously a very well-respected director and someone that I love as well, so this is going to be very excited. But before we do that, we're going to jump into your comments from last week's episode, or last week's episode, I guess we can say.
Yeah, we skipped the week.
Yeah, for Easter. Hey, man, it's Easter. We deserve that Easter break sometimes,
Easter
you know.
Easter break, yeah, exactly. And plus, we put together 2 parts of a Nolan thing. I mean, that's pretty big. You know? We should pat ourselves on the back for that.
Hey, and you guys should listen to it if you didn't. But for those who did, they left us some comments. Let's start with the first new comment that we have. That's just Haytak. It says, if you guys were to make films, who do you think your styles will most be like? P.S. I thought Dunkirk was real good, but it could have used slightly stronger characters. So if you can make films, what style, what director would you most be like? Funny enough, PTA might be one of the guys I would like kind of mimic my style. His very personal, very raw, very intimate, very character-driven style might be one that I kind of imitate. I don't know if you have someone off the top of your head.
Right. No, I mean, I'm always for like extremism kind of and creativity. So I mean, not necessarily taking like a style from this person, but like Tim Burton is somebody who I see as like who has a very extreme style, and I like that a lot. About, certain directors, some other filmmakers today have a very like extreme kind of
like you know it's them.
Yeah,
like Edgar Wright is probably another one.
Edgar Wright's one, yeah. Use of editing and sound and everything too. Fincher has a very strong style, I feel like, as well. So I probably emulate a lot of those kinds of films. And directors.
Denny is another one who I really like as well.
Yeah, my only thing with him, he has a very like slow pacing kind of deal.
Give it to me. I love it.
Yeah, no, I like watching it.
I love the slow pace.
I love watching it. As in terms of like making it as a filmmaker, as being young as I am right now, I don't necessarily think that's what I'm interested in. But still love Denis Villeneuve besides Blade Runner 2049.
GL Oyard says, hey, yo, I know you guys are always talking about views on YouTube, so I came over from the iTunes feed just to tell you that you guys are dope. Keep doing this. I love hearing you guys break down shit like this. It would be good if each week you would both recommend an indie film that you've seen recently.
Ooh, that's a good idea.
That's kind of cool, yeah. I haven't seen any indie films in a while.
Bro, yeah, honestly, I've been so detached. I haven't seen Isle of Dogs yet.
Isle of Dogs. I was going to see Death of Stalin. I didn't see that.
I didn't see that either.
I was actually going to see the new Zoe Kravitz movie, Gemini, just because it's Zoe Kravitz.
Oh, really? Yeah, I didn't even know she had a Gemini.
It just came out. It came out over the weekend.
Are you a Gemini? I'm a Gemini. What are you?
No, I'm a Pisces.
You're Pisces?
Yeah.
So when's your birthday?
March.
Oh, March,
passed,
right. Yeah,
2 weeks
ago.
That's
right. Happy birthday, by the way.
Thanks, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know it's been 2 weeks, so I didn't get to talk about it on the podcast, I guess.
Yeah, same day as we did the Schmodown match.
No, that's right.
Yeah.
That was totally right.
Fun, fun times.
That was.
To come out, and that was awesome.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe we could do that. I mean, something that can make it a little different. Either way, we appreciate you jumping over to say hi from the
iTunes. Yes, iTunes. Thank you. Our iTunes supporters are always out there, always tweeting us, Instagramming us. We appreciate that. Keep doing that, people, if you're listening on iTunes. And coming over to YouTube, too. Let's get those views up.
Yeah, YouTube is a fun place to be that people can join in. Jacob Bastian says, The Prestige is incredible. It gets better with multiple viewings. I find that with the case of most of his films, especially The Prestige, Interstellar, and Inception. Yeah, The Prestige is always fun to rewatch for me, as well as Inception is like... I think that's one of his most rewatchable films, besides the Dark Knight trilogy. Because you can always kind of get something out of it or kind of, pull something away from each character. I don't know. I think the Inception is really fun to rewatch.
It's funny. I think with a lot of Nolan movies, the more you rewatch it, the more the stuff that you like stands out, and the stuff that you don't like, really you don't like. Like for me in Inception, whenever I rewatch it, I love rewatching it. There's always that one scene, though, where Joseph Gordon-Levitt and Ellen Page just, kiss randomly. Out of it, that always takes me out. And it gets worse and worse every single time I watch that movie.
Why?
It just, it's stupid and doesn't, add up to anything. I don't know. I just feel like Nolan just wrote a scene let's have some sort of romantic something, I don't know. It was just... That was crazy to me, and it had no consequences. There's really no point. You cut that scene out of the entire movie, and it makes no difference.
It doesn't. I think the reason why, and this is something that you can see from the Dark Knight trilogy as well, Nolan kind of struggles with comedy. I don't know if you've seen. It's not a struggle necessarily, but I don't think his comedy really breaks through. I just don't know if because I was kind of rewatching The Dark Knight Rises.
With the doctor. The doctor guy.
Also, the scene where Alfred is going down the elevator and there's elevator music, little comedic moments that he throws in there that don't always feel in tone and don't land. It's not awful. It's not like you're cringing or anything, but it's very much like you're like, oh, he's trying to be funny, and it's a little giggle you'll get, but it's not. It doesn't always work as well, and I think that's what it was. I feel like he was like, man, this is so tight and it's so dreary and it's so tense that I have to break the tension with a little comedic moment, and that was that kiss with Joseph Gordon-Levitt and Ellen Page.
No.
I think that's him trying to break the tension a tiny bit because he's like, man, this is too much. Which doesn't always pay off, I guess. It didn't bother me just because I was like, I do the same, bro. Ellen Page, you have no idea how long I've had a crush on that girl.
Hey, Ellen Page.
I've had a crush on Ellen Page for years.
Yeah, Ellen Page is beautiful.
I know, and she would not be into me.
Well, I think she's
Nor
into
you. No. That's what I'm saying, man. I don't think she'd be into any of us. But either way, I still have a crush on her, so whatever. Let's get into Paul Thomas Anderson. Obviously, Paul Thomas Anderson is a director that I've, obviously, in preparation for this podcast, been reading up on a little bit more. And he's a guy who's very much a director who's focused on one specific thing. You know how directors kind of have their thing as far as what they want to say in each movie or what kind of themes they want to hit? Whereas Nolan always tackles incredibly overly ambitious films and overly ambitious themes, giant themes of society, of in Interstellar, he tackles themes of existence and stuff like that. Ridley Scott does the same. Zack Snyder does the same, tackling giant themes, big themes. Whereas someone like a Paul Thomas Anderson is much more interested in the character. The relationships and the intimacy of a character, getting into, for lack of a better term, the nitty-gritty of what their thoughts are, what their purpose is, what their decision-making is like, what their psyche is like, if anything else, because he really gets into the psyche of his characters. But I feel like as I've been rewatching most of his films, that's kind of the running through line I've seen in most of his movies, is the fact that he's kind of obsessed with getting inside the mind of a specific character. That's kind of what I've gotten from Paul Thomas Anderson. But do you have any other general thoughts on the director himself, Paul Thomas Anderson?
Yeah, no, I mean, I totally agree. I think his whole thing is kind of the relationships that people have and what kind of power each relationship kind of carries. There's usually a dynamic where there's a master and a trainer, a father or a son. In a lot of cases, broken individuals who start off as lonely and isolated, kind of forming their own family amongst other broken people as well. So this, I think that's a consistent theme in his films. And I think that, he definitely tackles a lot of that early on, particularly in his first half of his filmography, is a lot about family. It's a lot about people coming together. I mean, you see that in Hard Eight with Philip Baker Hall. He kind of brings in John, who's played by John C. Reilly, and Clementine, the prostitute, played by Gwyneth Paltrow, kind of brings them into his own little ecosystem, and understanding that they're both broken and kind of damaged and kind of that they're in search for something in and of themselves. He kind of unifies that and creates a family out of it. And I think that's the purpose in a lot of Paul Thomas Anderson's films, is that individuals being alone and isolated is broken, and that's people need to connect with other people in order to thrive. So I think it's particularly in his first half of his filmography. I think that's something that's really highlighted a lot.
Absolutely, yeah. Do you feel like he takes anything from his personal life that he puts into his movies?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think he has really with a lot of his movies, and we're going to talk about Boogie Nights and Magnolia and everything later on. But his personal life, I mean, his dad was a video store owner, so he watched a lot of film. He had a very strained relationship with his mother growing up, and then being just being a student of film and just being a lover of cinema and taking big inspirations. I mean, one of his biggest influencers is Robert Altman, who obviously done films like Nashville and a lot of other timeless films. He took inspiration from that in creating big ensembles and wide range of characters and long takes, and uses that to create unification in each individual. And I think you're right. When it comes to character, each character is so individually drawn and detailed and have their own life and personality and quirkiness. That's so weird and interesting, but it speaks its own kind of language as well. So, I think that's definitely the biggest part of it. And I think, his background in education. There was a whole thing I read that he went to NYU for 2 days, but then dropped out immediately because he just couldn't conform to the standards of what people perceive as the film school, or what you're supposed to learn in that sense, in that environment. And I think that plays a big part into his movies too, breaking out of what's the norm, what's the conformity. And he tells stories about prostitutes and gamblers and porn actors and sex addicted motivational speakers. So it's a lot of these different weird areas and fields and places that he comes from, different perspectives, and it all incorporates into this one universal truth of finding meaning through life through other people.
Yeah, absolutely. He's definitely unconventional, to say the least. And it's especially during the time he was making these movies. And that's another thing that I want to bring up that you mentioned. He's not that old. I mean, he's obviously not a young guy right now, but when he was making these movies, in 92 and stuff what time? 96?
96, yeah.
How old was he in 96? If he was born in 70, he was a younger director.
Yeah, he was 26. And he used the money he got from of course he paid tuition for NYU. He used his refund when he dropped back out to fund his first few short films. I think his first one is Coffee and Cigarettes. That came out in 1993.
I think his first one, wasn't it the Dirk Diggler?
One of them is the Dirk Diggler one.
Dirk Diggler story.
Dirk Diggler story, which is the inspiration for, of course, Boogie Nights.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Cigarettes and Coffee.
Cigarettes and Coffee is okay. That one followed. And then so he took his money from there. He also worked a lot on music videos. Was a PA. He actually PA'd for one of if I'm not mistaken, not P.A. He probably shadowed Robert Altman, his mentor, his inspiration, on one of his early films as well. On one of, not one of Robert Altman's early films, but one of PTA's earliest experience in film was mentoring through.
That's just mind blowing to me, man. Especially like, I really do. I know a lot of you guys might be like, that's not important, but it is. It really is important. It's especially with two young guys that you're talking to right now, especially Ep.28, who's way younger than me, but he made Boogie Nights when he was exactly my age. You imagine?
Yeah.
I could not do that. I'm 27 years old, and I'm like, I don't know if I could make that movie, bro. I mean, obviously not just the themes of the movie, but that's minimal. It's working with those powerhouse actors.
Oh yeah.
Holy crap, man. I'd be like, I'm good. I'm going to make a short film with these nobodies. I mean, because it's so much pressure to work with. That cast is incredible in that movie, obviously. And we're not talking about Boogie Nights. We want to start with Hard 8 because we're going to go in chronological order. But it really takes me aback that he made Hard 8 his first film when he was basically my age, when he was 26 years old.
Right.
And that's a very, especially for people who don't know about Hollywood and the way it's run, people really do judge you based on your youth. Like, if they see a young person, they will say, screw you. And I've been doing this for 20 years or 30 years. Or like, age is a really big deal in Hollywood for the most part. They don't really respect you. They'll see you as like a PA or as like an up-and-coming actor, but not as a director. Like, that's another thing that Steven Spielberg struggled with. Remember that?
Yeah.
Because he even talked about that when he was working with like big, heavy actors, and they would be like, nah, bro, you're like 25. We're not going to listen to you.
Yeah.
Like,
Joan Crawford is a big example of that. He directed an episode of a show she was on back then, and she was just pressing him super hard the entire time, trying to fire him and everything. So
it's crazy that this guy who's 26 years old and 27 was like giving direction to like Julianne Moore and stuff.
Yeah, Julianne Moore, John C. Reilly. But also, I mean,
crazy.
In the context of the 90s, a lot of these people weren't the big stars that they are now.
But they're still like...
They're still big names.
They're still big names, and they're still like very, like savvy actors. They're not up-and-comers. They're not like, well, this is our first movie. No, it's definitely not their first movie. And it's still a kid. Like, that's a big deal. But let's jump into Hard 8, because Hard 8 is obviously his first feature film, starring John C. Reilly and, like you said, I always forget his name, Philip Baker Hall.
Yeah, another Robert Altman frequent collaborator as well.
That's right.
So he takes who he likes from other movies and places them in his films.
That, like, almost every one of his movies has like an actor he's worked with for more than one film, for the most part. And yeah, it's basically it's Philip Baker Hall's character of Sidney who kind of runs into John C. Reilly's character, and he plays John. That's another thing that we're gonna see a lot of stuff come up.
The Johns.
No, the
Daniel. Daniel Day-Lewis playing Daniel playing
Paul. Daniel playing Paul.
Yeah.
Like, it really, I don't know why he does that. Like, I'm curious. That's such a little small thing for me to be interested in, but it really stood out to me as far as like characters having the same name as a real name. Yeah. Like, that to me is always odd, but
I think it goes back to that whole thing you mentioned earlier, how he collaborates with the actors and the creative process from the very beginning. I mean, we're going to talk about Phantom Thread in the second half of, the special, but
next week.
Yeah, next
for
week.
anyone who's
listening. So I think it's funny because you look at you look at some quotes that he had about Phantom Thread. Like, he said, like, him and Daniel Day-Lewis basically like wrote the screenplay together. Almost. Like,
I heard that too.
Yeah. So he's very much, he gives the actors reign over the character just as much as he would. So.
Yeah, it's definitely a true collaboration. But yeah, in this movie, he basically gets down into the characterization of the character of John, who's very much kind of like you said, down on his luck, lonely, kind of out of nowhere, basically.
Yeah, and needs $6,000 to pay for his mom's funeral.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where he gets into this world of gambling, and if basically kind of like cheating in a way, as far as like cheating the system of the gambling in the casinos, and then falling in love with Gwyneth Paltrow's character, and kind of like his whole spiral in that. That's the other thing, because we talked about Alexander Payne as far as how he has characterizations of the spiral, whether it be like a circular motion of where the character starts and where he ends up. As far as like PTA does that a lot, as far as like the character starts here, ends up basically in the same spot, or ends up in a lower position than where he started at, even though initially he found success.
Right.
That's probably like a Boogie Nights maybe. What do you think about this one, though, as far as John C. Reilly's character, who is the main character, and who's also kind of funny, especially if you rewatch this film? It's kind of funny seeing John C. Reilly in these roles. Because I personally, I didn't grow up in this era. I grew up very much in the Step Brothers era of John C. Reilly and the Wreck-It Ralph eras of John C. Reilly. That's my era. So I know John C. Reilly as the goofy guy who hangs out, who has the crazy hair and hangs out with Will Ferrell.
Yeah, right.
But when I look back at these films, it's kind of funny seeing him as like a kind of like a tall, kind of studdish, still goofy, but like much more stern John C. Reilly. He's always gonna be a goofy guy, but it's it's a different kind of John C. Reilly. But what do you think as far as like his characterization is where he's starting out and where he's ending up and what, because I feel like if we're going to do a meaning of Paul Thomas Anderson, the majority of these movies that we're going to tackle are going to be about the characters. I don't know if you disagree or if you feel like there might be other themes that he hits in this movie, and he might, but I feel like the characters are kind of the defining factor of what he's trying to say in each of his films.
Yeah, I think for the first half is going to be a lot of character talk. I think for the second half is going to be a lot more broader thematic talk, because I think over time that's what PTA just became more interested in eventually. But I think definitely with Hard 8, I mean, you know, the John character, he doesn't really have much of like an arc per se. It's more of him, you know, coming to terms. Well, I guess he does have an arc. He falls in love with Gwyneth Paltrow's Clementine, who is a prostitute, but then like, or I guess maybe not. Yeah, prostitute, I guess is the right term. Or sex worker, you know, for the more politically correct crowd out there. But she, you know, he falls in love with her. They elope, they get married, all this kind of business. But then it just like spirals completely out of control when she makes a bad decision and he like agrees to follow along with it and all this stuff. And you know, with him being on his own and being alone without Sydney and without Clementine, him by himself was just like this sad, broken person. But he found his purpose through meeting these other people and finding ways to make money through gambling and finding ways to find love in a relationship. But then ultimately at the end of the film, you know, the relationship doesn't really, like, you know, they're kind of driving, and it's kind of like this melancholy to come into the forefront, like with sort of like the ending of The Graduate when they're like driving on the end of the bus, and you just kind of see like their faces, and there's kind of like this kind of like worry, this anxiousness to see where that's all going to end up anyway. But yeah, the main star of this movie I definitely think is the Sydney guy who for him, his whole thing is trying to repair his mistakes from the past. It's revealed by Samuel L. Jackson's character Jimmy that, you know, the reason why Sydney's actually takes fondness to John. You know, again, he's looking for like a son kind of relationship, and it's the father-son kind of thing. But it's also because, to be frank, and this is a spoiler for, you know, people who haven't seen this film, but the Sydney character is actually the guy who like killed John's father, who we realize too. So it's very much like how Sydney's cycle of violence results in the creation of this weird John guy, and how his involvement in his life actually like brings life to him, but kind of takes life away from himself as well in the end. So it's very tricky kind of complex thing, which I really enjoy about this movie. I just think it's really fascinating for somebody's first film to go into subject matter that's so like big, not necessarily big, but like that's so like, you know, kind of violent, but also like quirky in his own kind of weird way. Like that whole scene where they kidnap somebody, and then like and then Sydney's like, you guys should go to Niagara Falls, and he's like, oh, I don't want to go to Niagara Falls. I've been to Niagara Falls before. It's like, can we go to Vegas? Like, no, don't go to Vegas, you idiot. Like, I don't know, it's just they're having this whole conversation about it. I don't know, shit like that is really impressive with the characterization that he has in this film. So
yeah, that's another thing that I feel like less and less people forget about, especially when they watch Paul Thomas Anderson's movies. But every single one of his movies, and I'm telling you, I'm pretty sure it's every single one of them, has like a very dark humor kind of moment. Like whether it's a moment or whether it's the whole movie that you don't even realize is actually like a dark humor or a dark satire.
Boogie Nights was like hysterical.
Yeah.
When we get to talking about that.
Yeah, that's another one that's like people, if you twist your perception of a film, and that's really what he does, is like if you watch a movie and you kind of twist your perception of how you're viewing it, and if you don't view it as There Will Be Blood is another one where I'm personally cracking up in certain scenes. And it's like one of those things where it seems like a serious scene, but the way it's shot, the way it's directed, the way it's acted, you're like, nah, bro, he's trying to be funny. Like he's genuinely doing like a very dark
it's like very subtle humor.
Yeah, very dark, subtle humor where you're like, that's odd, but it's supposed to be kind of odd. And he does that obviously in Heart 8 as well. What do you think that Sidney's character, do you feel like that's kind of what it was for him as far as the connection he had with his father and the fact that he caused his death and the fact that he killed him? Is that what you feel like he initially saw in John as far as that? Do you feel like that was some sort of way for him to reconnect with that, or to make up for it, or to
kind of reconcile for his mistakes? Because you see, I mean, obviously Sidney's a guy who's very controlled, very well-mannered, and I think that's another like consistency in a lot of Paul Thomas Anderson's movies. There's usually the two dynamic characters, but there's usually one who's very controlled, very centered, have power, is self-assured and reassured and everything, and then there's the super insecure, super like unsure, unreasonable person who's like looking for their own purpose and meaning in life too. And I think that's definitely this dynamic here is the Sidney. He's put together. He's teaching John how to like screw over the casino, and he's like teaching, and he's like taking care of Clementine, like that's his daughter, and they have the whole conversation of where's your children, all this kind of stuff, but I think his the control that he has is what influences why John looks up to him as a father in a lot of ways, as somebody who's trying to find meaning in life in and of himself. And you can even see, I mean, they even have like lines in there that kind of suggest that he's taking a lot from that. John is taking a lot from Sidney in the sense that they buy the same car, they wear the same clothes, they buy the same drinks. That's very much like a father-son kind of thing. I think that's his whole way of reasoning. Like, oh, I took away a father from this guy. Let me act as that figure as well. So it's very much. But then he also misses his own kids too, and he can't see them. So he needs somebody to kind of fill in that position for him as well.
That void,
yeah, that void, exactly. But I think that's why the end of the film is so personal to him, because when Samuel Jackson comes up to him and kind of reveals that truth to the audience, it frustrates Sidney so much because he knows that's like his main central conflict. That's why in the end he like kills Jimmy and shoots him down, because like he doesn't want to be confronted with that like one place in his heart that's like left empty. So
and what do you feel is the conclusion of that, as far as that kind of apprentice father-son relationship that house? What is PTA trying to draw that out as?
Well, I think ultimately they separate at the end, and I think that's the big thing, is like letting your kids go. And I think that's the big theme of this movie, is like you have to let the past go, move forward into the future. Clementine ditching her old job, her old work, all that kind of stuff. John C. Reilly adopting his own new life and being his own person, and then having to branch off from needing Sidney in the first place. Of course, it's all by circumstances that are not really pleasant, by holding somebody hostage and going. If you don't know the plot of this movie, by the way, and I think we should have explained it up front maybe, but it's about. Yeah, no, it's not your bad. No, but we're talking a lot about it. It's a dude who this dude John, he meets Sydney, who's the older character played by Philip Baker Hall. They meet each other. He's like, oh, I need help to pay for my mother's funeral. So I will, so then Sydney teaches him how to make money through like working in the casinos. They cut to 2 years later. They have like their like father-son kind of thing going on. They meet Clementine. John falls in love with Clementine. They ultimately a lot of stuff happens off screen, but they get married. And then immediately after they get married, Clementine like finds a dude to like hook up with, like, still being a sex worker. And she screws him over $300. So then John and Clementine kidnap him and hold him hostage. And then Sydney comes in and like fixes the situation. And then ultimately, this is like the entire movie essentially, guys. But like that's really what happens here. So I think that whole like hostage situation thing is the catalyst of where the end of that relationship kind of breaks off. Where it's like, obviously, the Sydney character has his own past, his own immorality, and he doesn't want to face that again. So that's why he's very like concerned and doesn't want John to be involved in this whole thing to begin with anyway. So it's a very interesting kind of peek into the dangerous wild life of like Las Vegas, drugs and hookers and gambling. So
yeah, and it's also like a look into decision making, right?
Yeah.
As far as like what you take on as a decision and what you find as a solution. And sometimes that solution might be worse than the decision you made initially.
Right.
So yeah, it's incredibly interesting, and obviously, it's not the most watched PTA movie, but I recommend watching it for sure. I'm sure RB3 does the same. And it's also a look into Paul Thomas Anderson's start, as far as the way he draws up characters and the way he takes a dive into the characters and the way he kind of maps out where the character's journey is going to go for each of his other movies as well, because that's kind of what his MO is, essentially, is doing this.
Yeah, it's a big style piece as well. There's a lot of whip pans, there's a lot of those push-ins that Paul Thomas Anderson became famous for. It's also, I think no other director kind of utilizes the differences in aspect ratio and video format versus like the actual film in and of itself, like the scene where towards the end when Clementine gives Sydney their wedding tape from when they get married, and he's watching it, it's just that very tight aspect ratio, giving it this sense of compression, this intimacy, and we see that a lot in Boogie Nights come up as well too. So
speaking of Boogie Nights,
let's
do it. Let's get into Boogie Nights, which came out, I believe, in 97.
Yeah.
Wow, 1997. And yeah, this is kind of, I mean, Hard 8 was definitely a movie that was his first movie, and I feel like, would you agree that this is the movie that kind of put Paul Thomas Anderson on the map?
Yeah.
That people consider to be the one where it's like everyone paid attention to who he was based off Boogie Nights.
No doubt. And I think that's one of the biggest parts of why Paul Thomas Anderson is Paul Thomas Anderson today, because he brought forth like this sprawling kind of epic in a lot of ways in the story of Boogie Nights. Based in 1970s/1980s Los Angeles, Boogie Nights is something that is based on. It's a film that's based loosely on the story of oh man, the name just slips me. Just that quick.
What name?
John Holmes. Oh, okay. He was a porn star who was around during that time period, and is loosely based on like that kind of story. Including that whole like big massacre scene that happens like midway through, which is just hilarious to me. But yeah, it's based on that, and it's based on like the change and development in the porn industry during that time, and it's almost in a certain kind of way like revisionist history.
Sure.
For a lot of cases, a lot of these characters have very happy endings. In reality, a lot of porn actors, particularly during that time, and porn directors, didn't have the happiest of endings. The real story of John Holmes is in like him ODing towards the end of the story, towards the end of his life. But it's just really crazy and weird and interesting, the kind of different approaches that they have to this angle of the story, with so many different characters that each revolve around their own kind of issues and problems as well.
Yeah, it's definitely much an ensemble piece. And obviously we talked about how this is kind of the one that gave Paul Thomas Anderson his career. Would you agree that this is also kind of Mark's kind of initial. I mean, obviously he was known for music and stuff and hip hop, but as far as like acting and getting into the acting world, this is one of his first movies and one of the ones that really kind of jump started his career. Would you also agree with that as well?
No
I
doubt.
think it's one of his first.
It's one of his first. I think this is definitely what launched him into superstardom. You know, I know there was a period in time where Leonardo DiCaprio was actually considered for the part of Dirk Diggler.
Interesting.
But it was either this or Titanic.
That's gnarly.
Yeah. So he picked Titanic. Mark Wahlberg got this, and I think that's actually kind of perfect. You know,
yeah.
I can't really see Leonardo DiCaprio playing this part. I could definitely see Mark Wahlberg playing this part, not just because of his presence and his swagger. I think fits a lot more with the character like of Dirk Diggler.
Sure.
His interpretation of that. I don't think Leonardo DiCaprio would have necessarily been able to bring that same kind of. It would have been very charming, very smiley kind of thing, you know. Where Mark Wahlberg has this kind of like thuggish kind of charm to him, I think. So I think that's what really makes this movie appealing.
I'm so curious about that casting, right? Because obviously these are kind of goats, man. I mean, you got freaking Julianne Moore, you got John C. Reilly, you got Don Cheadle, you got
Heather
Graham, you got William H. Macy. I forgot he was in this movie too. He's great in this movie.
Classic actors again, like Philip Baker Hall and Burt Reynolds having to return to stardom.
That's right.
After his hard descent that happened in the late '70s, early '80s.
Yeah.
Now it was like the great comeback role that is.
Yeah.
William H. Macy, Philip Seymour Hoffman, like you said.
Like this is a crazy cast.
Yeah,
man.
Don Cheadle. Did you mention Don Cheadle?
Yeah. I love Don Cheadle, man.
Yeah,
he's one of my favorites.
Luis Guzman.
Yeah,
who I accidentally mistake for Michael Pena that one time.
It's like that's the weirdest mistake. It's like me mistaking Don Cheadle for like Samuel L. Jackson. It's like what? Or like Don Cheadle for like Shaq. It's like what? How can what? Don Cheadle's not Shaq, bro.
People, you gotta check out the Wangers commentary we did for Ant-Man. I think that's the one free one that they put out for free. The Ant-Man commentary. Check that out. That is hilarious. You're in a couple commentaries too, right? Or
yeah. I'm in the end of the Civil War one and the Doctor Strange.
That's
one.
Right, the Civil War one. Yeah, that's right. Those are coming out probably tomorrow. Something like that. Yeah. But yeah, no, very, very, very stacked cast.
It's an incredible cast, and I'm just the reason why I mention it is because I'm very curious as far as the casting. Mark Wahlberg did Basketball Diaries before this.
Really?
Yeah.
With Leonardo DiCaprio.
There you go.
Yeah.
He did it like 2 years before this movie.
I think they even mentioned one time. I remember when I was a little kid at a award show, they had mentioned. Like they were both presenting an award together, and then I think Marky Mark made a joke. It was like, or it was either Marky Mark or Mark Wahlberg. Like they were both on stage, and it was like, "Yo, Titanic, and Boogie Nights were a long time ago, brother." Like they were both. I don't know. I can't remember the exact context of it, but it's kind of funny. They were friends coming up in this business, and they both split off into very different directions in terms of film. I mean, obviously, Titanic became the highest grossing movie of all time.
Sure.
And then Boogie Nights, not the biggest movie, but a lot of critical acclaim, a lot of Oscar looks, and definitely put Mark Wahlberg as like one of the Hollywood leading men.
As like an actual actor.
Yeah.
Whereas before he was more like, oh yeah, I've seen his music videos before.
Yeah.
Or like his look. He was known mostly for like his look, where it's like, man, this guy's buff and he can dance and he's super good looking. Like that's mainly what it was known for beforehand.
Yeah.
Versus like after Boogie Nights is like, oh no, he's actually a pretty good actor too, and he can hold his own against a really incredible cast. Right. But obviously the plot of the movie is extreme. I mean, the world, like obviously I wasn't alive during the 70s and 80s, but it's late 70s, early 80s. And the world, the porn world was so different. like looking back at it now, you're like, bro, that would not fly.
Oh yeah.
Like nowadays, especially now with access, right? Everything now is about access. But back in the day, they had like movie theaters that would show like movies, and people would go in there and then walk out like in the middle of the movie.
Yeah.
And it's I forgot about that, but that's kind of how it was. and there was actually like directors who were solely focused on adult entertainment, and that is so interesting now, because like now it's just like if you got a camcorder, you're a porn director.
Yeah,
And that's basically all you need.
Yeah.
Like not even a good camera too, but back in the day, like this guy wanted like film and shit. Like they were telling him the film was just too expensive, and he's like, no, it must be the story in the film. And it's like, bro, no one cares. Like as I was rewatching this movie, that's what I was thinking. I'm like, man, no one would care anymore. Like that does not matter at all. But basically, it's like the up and coming of like this down on his luck, aspiring young guy. I forget his name in the movie. Mark Wahlberg's character.
Dirk Diggler.
Yeah, Dirk Diggler, but his real name is Eddie Adams.
Eddie, yeah.
And he wants to be called Dirk Diggler because he feels like that's like his empowerment. That's he's finally like empowered as a man and as a person and as a human being, where when he was living with his mother called him a loser, and he was like lazy, and he didn't do anything, and he was throwing his life away. He couldn't even finish high school. Like he was very much like, he wanted all the fame and all the success without any of the effort or work. He just wanted it quickly. And funny enough, it just so happened that he got it quickly because he was a good-looking guy when he was seen by Burt Reynolds' character in the club.
Yeah, Jack Horner.
Jack Horner. But when he sees him in the club, he just sees like a really young, good-looking guy and says, you should be in this industry, kind of thing. And it's crazy how... as I was rewatching this movie, that's a funny little scene, because it really makes you realize that that's kind of how it was and / kind of how it is nowadays. Not as much nowadays, but back in the day, if a director saw you working in a restaurant and sees a really good looking girl or a really good looking guy, they'd be like, hey, you should be in movies. Come by tomorrow and audition for blah, blah, blah. And that's kind of how it was. There's a lot of stories of people...
It's like the whole Mia Khalifa thing, apparently. Like, she worked at, like, some sort of gas station or something. I don't know.
Yeah, but
then, like, some dude just came up to her and was like, you should be in porn. And she was like, oh, maybe I'll try it.
But that's
the biggest porn star in the world.
Yeah, but there you go. But that's kind of how it is, and that's kind of how it was, where it's like people would just be like, hey, you're really good looking. You should do this. Or, hey, you're a beautiful girl. You're a beautiful guy. You should be an actor. You should do this. And it's like, you should be a model. Like, people, you hear those stories, and they're obviously creepy stories, because it's kind of creepy. But it's crazy how, like, that actually happens sometimes. And that happened in this case for him. And it's him kind of taking that success, and the success kind of going to his head because of the giant chip he had on his shoulder for the way he was brought up. I don't know if you see it any differently, but that's kind of how I saw it, as far as like he has this giant chip on his shoulder to prove himself to his mother, to his family, to himself, that he's like this big star, that when he finally gets that success, he just wants to take a hold of it and kind of lets it get to his head a little bit. And he doesn't realize that it's getting to his head so much. And it obviously leads to him making poor decisions and making decisions based on impulsiveness rather than actually thinking it through and learning of the business in a correct way. But yeah, it's a crazy movie, and like you said before, it deals with other storylines. That's obviously the main storyline. There's the Julianne Moore storyline with her kid and the custody of her kid and stuff like that. Right.
Again, it's a lot of this is about like strained relationships with mothers too. Early on they have that whole thing where the kid calls the house phone, is looking for Maggie.
That's right.
And you don't know who Maggie is, and then it's later revealed her real name is Maggie the entire time. It's like, oh, that's really heartbreaking. The whole custody battle she has with the husband, all that kind of stuff. But then, in all fairness, he's right. Like, she is around a lot of sex and drugs and cocaine. And that's, I think that's a big part of why all of these characters are kind of attracted to his lifestyle to begin with, is because it's so different, because they're having such a universally different time and everything too. It's just really fascinating how they approach that. And I also think, as much as it's about like strained relationships with mothers and family, and also I think before I move on from that, like that whole scene where she kicks him out of the house and then the door closes, and then it cuts immediately to Jack opening the door. Like, that's one of the most brilliant pieces of filmmaking I think ever. Just in that one quick second, you entirely get what this movie is about. And I think having all these lost souls like kind of recouping and going into and finding their whole identity with this eclectic family of like pornographers is really fascinating. And I think that's even the case for other characters in this movie, like the not necessarily a family, but also looking for their own purpose. You talk about somebody like Don Cheadle's character, who is this like black dude, but he's really into cowboys and westerns and country music, but he's trying to sell speakers, and then his job like fires him for like trying to push country music onto people and selling these speakers. By the way, what's the name of the speakers that he sells? Is like T something?
I forget, man.
But apparently it's a Star Wars reference.
Oh no way!
Yeah. Which is really funny, and this movie has a lot of like late 70s.
If
like,
they do. It's like, you see Star Wars, man? It's like, dude, I've seen it like 4 times, man. Yeah. I just love how like back in the day, people were like, yo, Star Wars is the shit.
Now people are like, fuck Star Wars.
No, people still like Star Wars, but I just think it's funny how like back in the day, pop culture was literally just starting. Yeah. Like during this period, like Blockbuster just came out with like what year did Jaws come out? 75?
75, yeah.
So like Blockbuster's literally just started. So now it was a common thing. I don't know, this is, as a pop culture nerd, it's always funny to see how the commencement of pop culture and how this was kind of the commencement, as far as like you can literally walk up to anyone on the street and be like, yo, Star Wars bro, am I right?
Yeah.
Yo, Princess Leia, man. Like that's a thing like back in the day, whereas like before, like maybe in the 60s or 50s, like there wasn't anything that big where everyone knew what it was, or everyone's seen Star Wars and stuff.
Right.
I think that's cool. Like that's really cool.
Yeah, it's really funny. But it's funny little details that he puts and sprinkles throughout the entire film.
It's when Don Cheadle's trying to sell the speakers and he's blasting country music.
Yeah.
And the guy's like, "I'm good, man."
Yeah.
Or when he's talking to that one girl, I forget her name.
I forget who plays the wife. Yeah, his wife in that film. I forget too.
No, it's the super tall Nicole.
Right.
Parker.
Right. Becky. And she ultimately ends up marrying somebody else.
And she's like, this cowboy shit isn't working, bro.
Yeah.
It's funny. Like obviously, Paul Thomas Anderson is very much into humor, and this is like his kind of humor.
And then it flips all the way at the end when he's like using like hip hop, and trying to sell speakers too, which I think is really fun. I also think it's funny, and I don't know, maybe I'm reading too far into it, but the whole reason that he ends up like that whole thing in the donut shop where it's that big shootout, and you clearly see like the redneck dude. The most over-the-top gun owner in the world. He's like literally reading a magazine of like hunters and trackers, like wearing a fucking redneck hat and shit. And then he pulls out his gun and starts shooting everybody, and ultimately that's how like everybody dies and he gets his money. I think it's kind of funny. Is like that's kind of like a lot of where the country western mentality kind of roots, and like not roots, but there's a connection, to the heavy gun culture as well. And I think that it's just funny how that is ultimately a reflection of probably one of his most traumatizing experiences, but also the experience that allowed him to get the money to start up his own shop anyway. And I think that's what's really funny about this movie. I think more than any other Paul Thomas Anderson movie, I think a lot of Paul Thomas Anderson movies have this similar kind of structure. It's like the story of a rise, then a fall, then a rise again. You know what I mean? And this is definitely a movie that highlights that through and through from the very beginning. Particularly, I think, with the Mark Wahlberg character, with the Don Cheadle character, and with Jack Warner obviously fighting for his usage of film and paying the extra buck to have the higher quality storytelling that he wants in his porn. So
he's all about professionalism and high quality and stuff like that, and putting you in the story, whatever that means.
Right.
I mean, if he was talking about movies, I'd be like, yeah, man. True. Oh, not porn.
You know what though, man? I was thinking about this, man. Like today, like we don't like story and porn because like we just want to get to it. You know what I mean? But like that's because we're watching on our phone. Like I think back in the day, like we had to actually go to a movie theater and like pay and sit down, and you couldn't even like do anything there. You just had to watch. Just hopefully remember it later. I think the story, at least it needed some story to like. To keep people, interested at the very least.
I guess.
I don't know. I mean,
I'm still pessimistic on that.
I'm speculating here, but I don't know. But yeah, no, I mean, hey, listen, the little clips that they showed of like the story aspects weren't like that bad actually. Like when he was like what they create that whole character of of, I can't remember.
Dirk Diggler?
No, Dirk Diggler, but he also was like, I want to be my own character. I want to do my own James Bond kind of thing.
Oh,
like, yeah. Those little clips. But again, I think that there's a lot of excellent examples of using intertextuality, cinematic textual references in presenting this film. Again, another example of the aspect ratios. When Julianne Moore and Mark Wahlberg are having that sex scene, and they show you from the perspective of the camera, and it's very like it's that very like analog. Again, another thing to enhance intensity and all that stuff. And you know, particularly in that scene, I think this movie tells you what it's really about. It's not really about porn. It's about the love of cinema in and of itself.
Sure.
Because when they're having their sex scene, you don't see necessarily the full sex scene. They literally pan into they literally zoom into the camera and like go inside of the camera lens, and you see the image flipped upside down in a way a film gate would actually like register the images and stuff like that. So I just think it's really fascinating. And again, you know, the whole late 70s, early 80s, that was a transition for porn, but that was also, I mean, earlier in television, that was also a big problem too, when TV shows used to be shot on film, and then a lot of studios insisted you have to start shooting on videotape to save money. And you know, that was a lot of creative people's big problems with videotape.
Well, I mean, it's something we even face nowadays, right? With digital. Film versus digital, where some directors will put their foot down and say, I'm going to shoot on film. And people who try to talk them out of them. Studios, producers who say, no, shoot on digital because you will save a lot of money. And it's true, you save a lot of money.
Save a lot of money. I think, you know, it's funny, and I'm sure Paul Thomas Anderson has his position on digital. I personally, I mean, I don't see, I see the comparison definitely in like the change of like the format that you're shooting on. But I think digital is kind of the way to go personally. As a filmmaker myself, you know, film is nice, but it's super expensive and it's super long to like light and figure out and DP for it. Whereas film, you just, you know, you have the ability to do so much more with digital respects. I know that's kind of like a weird rant to go on when we're talking about Boogie Nights, but like,
I think it's totally acceptable.
No, I'm very much on the digital side of like the art form.
I'm on the personally, I'm with you. I'm on the digital side. But overall, I would be. It really depends on who the director is.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is choice. Like I hope directors can have a choice between film.
Some digital. Directors don't, though, man.
Yeah, some directors don't.
Some up and coming directors who are starting out, like they can't. And like if I'm like a really powerful mega superstar director, like a Tarantino, then
or
if
Nolan,
I want film, it's film.
Or PTA.
Or
those
PTA.
Those are film guys. They get to shoot on film.
Yeah.
But if it's somebody like who just has a $2 million budget.
Yeah, and they want to shoot like a short horror starting their buddies, then no, bro, shoot.
Yeah.
Like,
no, definitely. I think that's why digital is so important.
And if anything, man, like my brother was talking about, because my brother is like a director. I mean, he does commercials and music videos. He has done short films and stuff, and he's talked to me about that stuff, and he's read up a lot about it, and he's very much on the digital side. It just makes sense. It's easier. It gives you more access. It gives you more opportunity. And it's in the look is minimal depending on what you're shooting. Is kind of what it is.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely, you can emulate a lot of what film does
correct.
On digital formats. And I think that's the thing too. I think for a lot of people, don't understand digital versus film.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times when you see people, oh, everything should be shot on film and we must have film.
And they don't even know what it is.
They don't know. They don't know. Like, you have to literally be behind the camera and know what shooting on film looks like, what editing on a fucking flatbed looks like.
Yeah.
Like, that's the hardest thing in the world. Like, digital is so nice. And by the way, what's the real point of shooting on digital if everything's projected digitally?
And I feel like
shooting on film if everything's projected digitally anyway.
Exactly. Yeah. And I feel like it's very much, obviously it depends on who the director is and all that, but people forget about accessibility and people forget about making something easier for someone else. Easier. People hear the word easier and they think lazy. Easier in the way of financial aspect, right? Because if I'm an up and coming director, it's an easier opportunity for me to shoot on digital, and I have that chance now. Whereas like before, back in the day, I didn't have that opportunity. It's lowering the price of something so that more people have access to it. People with who have poorer upbringings, people who have struggled more, can now make movies and have that chance to make movies, whereas like before, movies were made by rich white people because they were the only ones who had access to that,
afford the film,
who could afford that. And now it's like people don't realize that the doors that digital opened was because of, you know, it gives more different backgrounds access to what used to be incredibly expensive.
That's why I love the fact that, you know, Steven Soderbergh obviously started his career using film and everything too. But I love the fact that he ultimately went full digital, and just his most recent thing was shot on an iPhone. You know what I mean? So he
still have you seen Unsaved
I
yet?
haven't seen it.
I haven't. I was gonna see it, and then I just didn't get the chance.
Yeah. No,
but I will see it, and we probably will do a Soderbergh for anyone who's asking.
Oh yes.
Soderbergh is dope.
Fucking probably like 3-part. That's a lot of films.
He's got a lot of movies.
But yeah, I mean, going back to Boogie Nights, I mean, it's that whole thing of like the creator, the artist, and even though it's porn, it's something that Jack Warner takes very seriously in his heart and everything too. And all the other ancillary characters in this movie, like Roller Girl, has her own kind of arc, her own kind of story, starting off with her in high school. And then, like, as the time progresses, she ultimately sees that fucking scumbag again. By the way, going to CSUN, which really hurts as someone who went to CSUN. That was really crazy. He's like, "Oh, yeah, I'm from CSUN." Oh, it was the whole thing. He was like, "Do you go to?" Jack Warner was like, "Do you go to school?" And he's like, no, I don't go to school. And it's like, oh, actually, I go to CSUN. Like, I don't know, it's just so stupid. But yeah, that scumbag, he gets his ass whooped, so that was nice. But it was just kind of funny seeing that whole, like, how her whole arc kind of started. Like, she had to take being disrespected from people, but you know, and in that moment where, you know, she has to do the weird, you know, like, backseat thing with the dude, and then she gets kicked out, and Jack Warner starts whooping his ass, and then Jack Horner. I keep saying Jack. The reason why he's named Jack Horner, by the way, if you don't know, is because it's based on Jack Warner, the Warner Brothers executive that originally created the studio and stuff like that. So it's not inspired. It's not like that is who it's based on, but that's who inspires the character. When he's whooping his ass, and then she comes out, and that's like when the subtext rises to the text, right? When she's like, "Don't disrespect me," all this kind of stuff. Very powerful scene, and she has a very powerful arc in and of herself, discovering why she's so pissed off at homeboy. So again, that's you know, that, and then again in the end, it's like the rise and then the fall, but then the rise again. She ultimately does end up going back to school and does finish and, you know, work towards getting her GED. Same thing with you know, and she develops like a mother-daughter relationship with Julianne Moore as well, with her character, with Maggie, and that's another thing about her character too. Even though she had a son and had a husband, she uses she uses her porn kind of family to foster her own kind of family in and of herself. Even though, I mean, I know it's weird, like, having Mark Wahlberg and her having sex in that one scene, but it's not like romantic. Yeah, I guess, you know, sex is supposed to be romantic, but it's this weird kind of thing. It's like, it's not romantic, but it's like familial, you know? But like,
where are you going, RB3?
Wait.
Whoa. You talking about hooking up with your mom or something?
No. Which I just think that's, you know, her purpose is being the mom to these two kids.
Not playing with you.
No, but you know what I'm saying? But it's a weird thing that he's doing with that.
100%. I 100% agree with you. I'm just giving you a hard time.
No. Well, I do think there is a fan theory out there that Mark Wahlberg's mom does want to have sex with him the entire time.
That is creepy.
That's where there's like the reason why she's waiting at home for him when he comes home that one time is because, like, she's frustrated and jealous that he's having sex with like another woman. That's why he leaves the house, because, you know.
The reason why I go like this is because I probably do buy that.
Yeah.
That's probably the case,
And
but
then,
it's still weird to me.
in that one scene, they're having no argument, and then, like, literally in the middle of the argument, it just cuts randomly to the husband just sitting on the side of the bed, looking so sad.
Yeah.
So I think that's what fosters that theory. But no, I there's a lot of like interesting draws and characters. Lil Bill, played by William H. Macy.
Yeah.
He had like a really tragic storyline in and of himself.
Sure.
Another example of like some really quirky dialogue though with my wife's got an ass in her cock.
Yeah.
Again, a lot of really funny, and I love that scene when he's doing that whole monologue, and it's like him and the colonel like standing and talking, and then like in the forefront but in the background you just see a bunch of dudes like surrounding his wife as she's having sex. It's just a lot of great composition throughout, and I think this is I don't know, this to me is one of my, this probably a lot of people regard this as their best Paul Thomas Anderson movie. I think it's one of my favorites.
Yeah, as far as favorites, you mean?
Yeah. Oh man, I didn't even get to mention that great scene with Alfred Molina. Where he plays the coked out drug dealer who's like,
oh yeah, Alfred Molina. Yeah,
Alfred Molina. Yeah. And they have that grace.
That's like everyone's favorite scene in the movie.
Oh, dude. It's just the weird randomness of it. The Jesse's Girl song, the random firecrackers popping off, kind of like making this weird unpredictability to it. The acting, which I've argued on the Schmoes No Show, probably Mark Wahlberg's best performance.
I think it is his best
performance.
performance.
When he's like sitting there just stoned out and just like literally zoned out in that moment. And every like literally all these sounds and stuff is happening, but he's just locked on the close up of him, just looking totally fucking lost. That to me is amazing. There's so many amazing parts in this movie, man.
Yeah.
This is just brilliant filmmaking through and through.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and obviously this is one of Paul Thomas Anderson's great films, and a lot of different themes that come up in this movie in a true ensemble piece. Mm-hmm. But his next movie is even more of that, if times 10, right? Because it's essentially all individual stories that seem to be disconnected but have running themes throughout it, and that is Magnolia.
Right.
And Magnolia is a movie that followed up Boogie Nights, so it definitely was something that people were anticipating in a way, because it's a follow-up to a movie that a lot of people enjoyed in Boogie Nights. And Magnolia hits on a ton of different characters, and a lot of them are the same actors that we see in Boogie Nights, with William H. Macy, John C. Reilly, Tom Cruise is in this movie.
Julianne Moore.
Yeah. What is your
Philip Seymour
Hoffman, who's also in Boogie Nights? We forgot to mention him.
Yeah,
who plays like a super quirky character.
Boogie Nights. Yeah, he's battling like his own sexuality in Boogie Nights, trying to hook up with Dirk, but then I think that's a nice little thing too, though. Like how he tried to kiss Dirk, and he was like, oh no, I'm not cool with it. But they still are friends, and ultimately in the end.
Nice. Philip Seymour Hoffman, he comes up in a ton of these movies. I think he was in Hard 8 too.
He was in Hard 8 for like one scene. Yeah.
Either way, Magnolia is a crazy movie. What is your thoughts on this movie? Because it's so many different stories going on at the same time. A lot of this is based on the editing of the movie as well. What are your thoughts on this movie?
This film is one of my top 5, maybe top 3 favorite movies of all time.
Really? Wow.
This is a movie I care very much about. This is 3-hour, to me, masterpiece.
That's another thing that we forgot to mention about Paul Thomas Anderson. All his movies are long.
Yeah.
All of them are at least like 240. Like Boogie Nights is 2 hours and 40 minutes.
Yeah.
There Will Be Blood is like 245.
Yeah.
Like all of them are like just under 3 hours.
Yeah.
But you can keep going.
No. I mean that's Magnolia for you, though.
It is.
That's probably the biggest ensemble that he's ever put together.
Yeah.
This is, again, it's another Robert Altman inspired thing, but even this one was like kind of magnituded out to like a bigger scope, where you have all these intertwining stories with John C. Reilly playing a police officer who's looking for love, Tom Cruise playing a sex-addicted motivational speaker who has a strained relationship with his father, Julianne Moore playing a soon-to-be widow. Her husband is dying. The only reason she got with him was for the money, but now she's actually starting to fall in love with him towards the end of his life. William H. Macy playing this closeted former game show winner, but playing this formal game show winner, but now he's in the closet, but he's trying to like live his life as a gay man and hook up with like this bartender. The whole game show storyline in and of itself. With the kid.
And what's his face? The older guy?
Philip Baker Hall yet again. And he has his whole story with, his relationship with his daughter and him dealing with, his past and his troubles.
Do you have a favorite storyline? Because I know a lot of people have favorites for this movie.
Yeah, I mean, I know it sounds generic, but the Tom Cruise one really gets to me.
That's everyone's favorite.
Yeah.
Literally everyone's favorite.
Yeah, I mean, this is probably the most emotional. Well, personally, actually, maybe that's not correct. I love the Kiss storyline. I just don't love the ending to that necessarily.
Okay.
The Kiss storyline, for me, I immediately connected with it, not because I'm some sort of kid genius or whatever. But growing up, I used to like go to a lot of different competitions and shit. For like math and science. So like it was, I would like travel across the country and do that kind of stuff. So it was like, it's almost kind of not similar, but it was a thing that I definitely identify with the competitive nature that this kid has, but I also understand like him like leading a team and like nobody else is like carrying any weight and everybody's depending on him for answers, but he's just this like little kid who's dealing with this circumstance. For me, to me, the only thing I don't like about that storyline is that he just ultimately ends up in the library again, which again makes sense probably thematically. I just wish it just kind of fizzled out towards the end, I feel like. Sure. But the John C. Reilly storyline is very heartbreaking to me too.
Yeah.
Very heartwarming, but very heartbreaking, but also very heartwarming too, in a sense, very sweet as well. But then to me, of course, the Tom Cruise storyline is what everybody talks about. And I think that's really because I think that one had the most umph to it because, again, it's the relationship between the father and the son that we keep seeing in all of these Paul Thomas Anderson movies. I think that's something he cares about very, very deeply. In the sense that, like, he's very much, in the sense that it's Tom Cruise, he doesn't have much of a leg to stand on in and of himself. He's very successful and everything too, but he's running away from his past, but then ultimately he just comes to have to confront that towards the very end and leads to like this big emotional crescendo. This is all around. It's just one of the best written arcs, and you've got Tom Cruise an Oscar nomination for this role too. So.
A lot of people say it's still his best performance to date. Do you agree with that?
I agree with that. Yeah, that or Born on the 4th of July, definitely one of those two. But I almost kind of give this one the edge because he's playing like the external version of what people perceive Tom Cruise as, but a more extreme version of the very charismatic, the very sex-driven kind of character that he is as a movie star. But it's taken to a whole nother level because he's literally preaching about sex. But then you also get the deeply emotional and broken version of Tom Cruise. And you get some of the most iconic lines in film history, I feel like. The whole, like, I'm silently judging you. Yeah. That just instantly became a part of, like, mainstream, like, conversation and all that stuff. So it's just all around that whole storyline and his performance in particular. Because you really have to be sold on him as the swagger kind of cool guy for that emotional punch to hit at the end. So,
what do you feel is the running theme throughout all the stories? What is the connecting thread that Paul Thomas Anderson puts between every single one of these individual stories? Besides the location, because I think it's all in San Fernando.
Yeah, all San Fernando Valley. I think the whole original concept was that it was all supposed to take place on like the same block.
Gotcha.
But then like I don't know how you'd be able to explain that.
No. Not very well.
But I think the opening of the movie summarizes what the whole thing about. Like what the whole thing is about. The whole idea of coincidence. How it opens on the whole story of a dude who of the guy who commits suicide and jumps off the side of a roof but gets shot on his way down. So it's technically considered a murder. That's again, that whole opening sequence just kind of encompasses, I think, exactly what this film is about. It's about the character, but it's also about just weird coincidences and how all these people ultimately end up interacting with each other to begin with, how they're all connected too. I think this is also a very spiritual movie in and of itself, as well. I know the whole thing with the ending of the frogs, the frog ending kind of pisses a lot of people off. But it's really, he takes that from like a passage in the Bible where the world, the frogs, or maybe it wasn't part of, it was, It was something, but it's definitely very biblical. It's supposed to reflect one of the plagues of like, wasn't one of the plagues in the Bible about the frogs or something like that. So it's definitely supposed to invoke that. And I know that's where this movie turns a lot of people off, is this ending with the whole frogs falling out of the sky thing.
Yeah.
But I think that's very spiritual in the sense that it's like a random act of God ends up saving a lot of these people's lives, because when that moment happens, you see Julianne Moore like literally about to kill herself. You see Tom Cruise crying over his death of his father. The little kid in the library reading his books. Like all of the characters have their own kind of crescendo in that moment with the frogs coming down, and it's like a re-enlightening kind of moment. And which is hinted on throughout the entire film. I mean, they give you specific verse. I know for a fact in the opening sequences when they would like give you like the weather and stuff like that. Like apparently those numbers were like really the keys to like, or like really like Easter eggs to like the Bible verses that are alluded to in this film. Yeah. It's just all around. Just to me, it's a brilliant like kind of encompassing of like what spirituality really means, and like how we think all of our acts are like merely coincidence, and how everything intertangles and interweaves with each other is just a coincidence, but it's really act of spirituality and what's like the guiding hand. And which weirdly enough, I think Paul Thomas Anderson eventually turns his back on later on in his filmography. But I think that's why everything and everybody in this movie has like their own kind of arc and journey and revelations in and of themselves.
But do you feel like what kind of outlook is Paul Thomas Anderson trying to say about that spirituality? Do you feel like it's very much a positive or?
I feel like it's more positive here because this is a movie where I feel like there's more good endings than bad endings in this film. Ultimately, Julianne Moore comes to reason with why she feels resentment and guilt towards falling in love with this old dude who she's just marrying for the money. And by the way, she has some great lines in this film too. That whole scene where she's talking to the lawyer in his office, and she's like, "Shut the fuck up! Shut the fuck up! Shut the fuck up! Shut the fuck up!" Like it's just like there's just an amazing scene right there. Because she spends the entire movie drugged out, so like her dialogue is gonna be weird and crazy, but the way she delivers it is just so perfect. But
she's amazing, dude.
Oh, she's
like,
one
she's
of the
goats, man.
Yeah, of all time.
She's one of the goats, man,
Yeah.
for sure. President Coin forever. Every actor I know from Hunger Games, I see them and I'm like, oh yeah, I know them from Hunger Games.
Yeah, right.
Oh my God.
Right. No,
like later on, Inherent Vice. With Jenna Malone, and I'm like, hey, District 8.
Did you read the Twilight books? I'm not the Hunger Games books.
No.
Oh yeah. No, I read those actually before.
I'm like a massive Hunger Games fan. Obviously the movies, not the books.
Yeah.
But it's so funny how it's like always confusing to people. They're like, really?
No, I love it. Everybody should love Hunger Games.
It's great. Philip Seymour Hoffman's in it too.
Philip Seymour Hoffman's another one.
Yeah. Hunger Games Connection, guys, with Paul Thomas Anderson.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, there we go. Man, I just wish the last two would have been better.
I'm with you. I feel like they were. I still feel like they were solid. I still feel like they were really, really solid.
Yeah.
Especially part 2, but I still feel like part 1 and 2 are solid movies.
My thing is, if you read those books, particularly the third one, it's very clear why they would want to split that up.
Sure.
I thought their whole reason in splitting it up, because what happens at the end of definitely money.
It's money, bro.
Oh yeah, no, without a doubt. Because everybody was doing it back then.
Yeah.
But I just wish, to me, the whole problem with the third book is the same problem that's in the second part of the movie. It just kind of ends. Like, it's just so random and it just ends like that. So I thought with them splitting up into 2, I thought they were gonna flesh out that second half more and like the ending more and kind of make that a better kind of translation, but they didn't.
Yeah.
But the reason why I like the third, we're talking about Hunger Games. I'm not a part-time saying something.
I'm sorry.
But no, it's good. I'm sorry. I just like talking about Hunger Games.
I do. But I bring it up like on like every podcast.
No.
Remember I brought it up last time too?
Yeah.
With the Christopher Nolan with Interstellar, because Seneca Crane is in that movie.
Oh, right.
Seneca Crane.
And they're great films. you know, I like the third one just on the fact that they like she has to be followed by like this documentary crew of filmmakers, and they have to like literally direct her like, hey, act like you're upset.
I think
like,
that's really cool. I think that's realistic. Like in
Yeah.
the future, the power of media, man. We're seeing that now. Imagine like 50 years from now or 60, whenever the Hunger Games takes place, it's very powerful.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
that to me was like it rings true to that time. But anyways, back to Magnolia.
Back to Magnolia.
Julianne Moore is a great actress, and she
Julianne
has
Moore,
a great performance in this movie.
She has a great arc, I think, at the end of this too. She kind of learns to reason with her past, and I think that's what the whole thing's about, just reasoning with the past. William H. Macy has a good one, and again, it's another thing of like isolation is kind of like the worst thing for individuals and people in and of themselves. That's why all these characters are trying to find somebody else to connect with, and it even starts with that great song. Like one is the loneliest number. Yeah, that's that. You know, that just tells you right off the back, like this is what this movie's about. It's more about having a connection with people, and I think everybody ends up having a connection with the police officer and him finally dating the coked out chick who is like actually the daughter to the game show host. I think the game show host has a negative ending, mainly because we realize what his past is, and his like, you know, he you know, it's alluded to that he may have like sexually assaulted his daughter when she was like very young, and that's why she's so broken. But that's why the John C. Reilly companionship kind of matches up with that. And I think that's another way that the spirituality of this film kind of comes into play, is how John C. Reilly in and of himself is a very religious guy, prays all the time, and wishes, you know, and is such a wholehearted, wholesome dude. But in his lowest point, he's still faced with like the same kind of demons that everybody else is faced with when he loses his gun trying to chase a random guy, and you know, through the streets, and he loses his gun doing that. It's a very heartbreaking moment for him, because he feels like he's failed ultimately his purpose. So it's all great, and I think, you know, this movie encompasses a lot of really interesting and deep philosophical ideas in and of itself. Like I said, the chances of coincidences, spirituality, all that kind of stuff. So this is one of my favorite. Like I said, this is my favorite Paul Thomas Anderson movie, favorite Tom Cruise movie, favorite, like most of these actors. This is my favorite film of theirs, and like I said, potentially top 3 movies of all time.
That's crazy. I mean, obviously it's a great movie, and
yeah,
I didn't know it was that close to you for sure.
Yeah.
That's awesome, man. Speaking of isolation is a theme that is very much hit on his next film, which is Punch Drunk Love, which is Paul Thomas Anderson's romantic comedy, kind of
comedy, yeah.
With Adam Sandler.
Yeah, I think this is probably his most like outright comedy.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. I think all of his other films are funny. But this one's like a straight up comedy.
For sure.
Yeah.
And this one is very much dealing with the concept of isolation with the character that Adam Sandler plays, which I forget his name.
I forget his name too.
I will bring up his name in a second. But essentially, it starts out with that shot of him in the desk in the corner, in the empty office. And it kind of describes right there how he has that isolation. Barry's his name. And it's basically his journey of finding love with Lena, the character of Lena, played by Emily Watson, and basically the giant spiral that he has with it starts out with the loneliness through that hotline that he calls, that what is it, like a sex hotline or something?
Yeah, phone sex or whatever.
To eventually the connection that he develops with Lena, and then eventually this weird frequent flyer Miles thing.
With the pudding.
With the pudding.
Yeah.
And it's like this weird connection that he has. But essentially, it's kind of a funny movie in the sense like it's kind of like out of reality. Obviously, so is Magnolia in a way. But like an out of reality kind of movie as far as like looking back at this movie, how he's like, he gets like superpowers because of love in a way, because he's like super strong, and every time they were like, man, you're really strong, it's like, well, because I'm so in love or whatever, because he's able to take down what is it, Philip Seymour Hoffman? He's in this movie, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
It's Philip Seymour
As
Hoffman,
the guy who's running the phone sex.
And he takes down his goons, he takes down everyone, like he's basically like unstoppable in a way.
Yeah.
And he's like always breaking shit, like breaking windows and breaking the unbreakable thing.
Yeah.
And then his sisters tease him of that, and Like, it's a very interesting movie, to say the least, when it comes to those kind of themes as far as love and connection. But it starts out with that isolation and the journey that Barry develops into love, I guess you can say. But what are your thoughts on this movie? Because a lot of people see it as one of PTA's weakest movies.
Yeah, I mean, I could definitely see why people would read into it that way. I personally think this is one of maybe not his best, but like definitely probably most rewatchable, because it has like this weird layer of surrealism, like with like all of these like crazy quirky type of like opening shot, like the opening, like necessarily the opening shot, but that whole thing of like the car crash. And then the truck just leaving the piano thing like in the middle of the street.
That's right.
Yeah,
I forgot about that.
Yeah.
What is that thing called? The harmonia?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. And then just like all these like weird random scenes, the way they're like lit, the way they're shot, like the whole scene where Barry meets what's her name, Linda, for the first time, Lena, and then like they're talking in the alleyway, but like the sun's just completely like blowing her out, and you can't see anything. It's almost like a dream that you're watching in and of itself.
Like, it's really well shot.
Yeah. It adds to like the whole layer of surrealism, and we haven't talked enough about, I think, John Bryant, who is the composer for Paul Thomas Anderson, at least for, if I'm not mistaken, Boogie Nights, and for Magnolia, and for this film as well. And Magnolia's score is absolute perfection. And this score is great too, because it really sells you on like the weirdness, the strangeness, the surrealism that's happening here. But it's also something that sells you on Barry being like an actual kind of broken human being in and of himself too. So it's actually one of the great. This to me is another great Paul Thomas Anderson film.
Something that stands out too in this movie is color. Obviously, Adam Sandler's character of Barry is always in blue throughout this entire movie. He has a blue suit throughout the whole time. And Lena's character is always in red, kind of. Like, she's usually in red. And even that scene where he's in the grocery store and has that kind of like red, the woman in red kind of following him throughout the aisles. I don't know if you remember that. And it's that weird connection of like the ideas and the emotions that are brought up with the color of blue, of kind of depression, of loneliness, of somberness. And then the idea of red coming through change, coming through love, coming through different types of emotions, and definitely a catalyst of a different movement showing up in someone's life, whether usually meaning love, right?
Right.
But that's something that stands out to me the most in the movie, especially being such a visual romantic comedy. I don't know if you see that as well.
No, I think this is probably a comedy that relies most on its visual aesthetic to tell a story as well. I love that scene where and again, it's another film about like family and how he hates his family in and of himself.
The sisters.
He goes home to his sisters.
Yeah.
And the sisters.
I think the sisters are great.
they're hilarious.
Yeah.
When he goes back and then like, they're like, what do they call him? They keep calling him like all these names.
Yeah.
Like, are you gay boy? This and that. And like, he just gets so frustrated. He like literally kicks in the window.
Yeah.
And I think that's really smart. And I think I mentioned that because I think that's an example of Paul Thomas Anderson using like sensory overload to really heighten the comedy. Like, all you're getting is just different like layers on top of layers of like audio tracks of like people like talking at him. Like, you can't even make out what anybody is saying because it's just all these people just talking at him at the same time. And you feel very much inside of Barry's head, like he's confused and he's really hating this too, as much as you hate watching and having a hard time keeping up with this stuff. So it's like the sensory overload there really heightens the comedy.
Yeah, and it adds to his characterization of like the feelings that he's had this whole time and the struggles that he faces living with that family. Because you see that for like, a scene or two, but you imagine living, like spending years with those sisters. I don't think I could handle it.
Right.
And it's like one of those things as far as like, how does he handle it? No wonder he's like the way he is, because it is that characterization of that. I'm trying to find that actress who plays the freaking super funny character. My favorite character in the movie is that girl, that lady who's like, yeah, let's go. You want to do it? What are you doing? What are you talking about? Do you think something really food? Like the wife of that guy.
Oh,
you know who I'm talking about?
Oh, yeah, I know you're talking
the
about,
one who introduced her to Lena.
To
Lena.
yeah,
I think she's hysterical in this movie.
Yeah,
I think she's the one that stands out the most. She has like really quick weird dialogue, and she's always like calling out different things that Barry says. I just think it's funny, and I couldn't find her, but I forget her name.
That whole scene is funny too, when he's at work and then Lena's there and the sister's there, and then Luis Guzman's in the background like trying to fucking like keep shit from falling or whatever. Like literally everything's like crashing, and you just see all this happening in the background, and then Barry doesn't even like flinch. He doesn't even look. He's just like straight up trying to like talk to Lena. I don't know. That whole thing is just funny to me. And then you see the piano thing. What's it called again?
I think the harmonia.
Harmonia, yeah. You see the harmonia in frame. You see like all the pudding and like stuff crashing where he's like working his management shit. It's like all of it's just like crescendoing into like this really weird and funny thing. And I think again, we haven't touched on it in previous movies, but I think this movie highlights it the best. Is, to me at least, that there's a running theme of water in Paul Thomas Anderson's movies. The whole ending being like this peaceful thing of them going to Hawaii and living it up at the end. Obviously surrounded by water, a lot of water imagery kind of going with the blue aesthetic that he has from the very beginning. I think that's something that represents happiness and a lot of Paul Thomas Anderson's films. You see that at the end of Boogie Nights, or the beginning of Boogie Nights and the end of Boogie Nights, when they're just all in the pool having fun, and that shot goes underwater with them as they're drowning. It's not drowning, but they're swimming in the pool and coming up. And then again at the end, you see the pool coming back again at the long tracking shot at the end of Boogie Nights. Magnolia, there's a lot of rain that happens throughout the film. Most of the movie takes place in rain. But then once like frogs are the amphibians that come and like are like raining down on the people too. So like it's another kind of rain, water/rain analogy. I think this one with the Hawaii stuff. So I mean, maybe I'm reaching here, but I feel like water is something, and we'll even see him, I guess, like later movies too, particularly like The Master and Inherent Vice, another thing where water is a heavy component in that. But this movie, to me, is my favorite Adam Sandler movie, and I know it's like controversial to say.
Not really, considering the movies he's made. I'm just being honest. A lot of people like Adam Sandler, and I'm sorry, but
a lot of people are very fond of like Billy Madison, and
I know, like, I'm not gonna, because a lot of the people like at Schmoes and stuff like love those movies, and I'm like, they're all right. They're okay.
Nah, I love a lot of his older stuff.
I think they're okay.
Okay, I feel that.
I feel like this is one of his better ones.
Yeah, but from a performance level, I think this is probably one of his more quiet, kind of subtle performances, but still like reads a lot and registers in a very prominent way. I think this is kind of another part that, I mean, I don't know if Adam Sandler had a hand in creating this character, but it feels distinctly Adam Sandler while also feeling distinctly PTA as well. So I enjoy the mixture and the fusion of those kind of tones and of themselves.
Absolutely. It's definitely an interesting one for sure, and it's probably his only true romantic comedy that he has. Everything else that he comes up after this takes on a very different type of movie, and we will get into that next week when we face Paul Thomas Anderson Part 2.
Dun, dun, dun.
But as of now, Part 1 is officially over, guys. Hopefully you guys enjoyed our conversation on Paul Thomas Anderson, at least for the first half of his movies. We're going to get into, obviously, his second half and following episode, which is next week. Let us know what you guys thought of the conversation. What do you think specifically of these 4 movies? Obviously, you probably have a deeper connection with his other movies, but as far as these movies, Heart 8, Punch Drunk Love, Magnolia, and Boogie Nights, what are your favorite moments? What do you get out of the movie? What are your favorite themes in the movie? What are your favorite actors, performances? Whatever it is, guys, let us know in the comments down below. Once again, the comments is like the best thing you can do as far as connecting with us and as far as letting us know what you think of the podcast and what you want going forward. So please make sure and leave us comments, guys. We really do appreciate it. And for all you iTunes listeners out there, we appreciate you as well. You're beautiful, you're lovely, and you can listen to us whenever you want because we appreciate it. As for that is officially our PTA episode. I am Ace.
This is RB3.
And we are peacing out, guys. See you next week.